Hello and thank you for joining me again. Today's piece was inspired by a quick little idea I had where I wanted to show some golden glittery light shining through some glass. I didn't have a firm idea in my head about how I was going to do that, but all I knew was that I wanted some glass and some sparkle and some really golden light. So I set up some still life arrangements using some glasses and some bottles and some tiny LED fairy lights and started rearranging the objects and the lights to try and get something close to the feeling that I had in mind. I couldn't find a white sparkling wine in a clear bottle, so I saved a bottle from a sparkling rosé and poured some white wine into that so I could get that right golden glow that I wanted into my photos. It took a while and many different setups, but I finally snapped a shot that had all the light and sparkle that I wanted, so I thought I was ready to go. The background was where I faced my first hurdle. I had to question whether or not to include the actual fairy lights or just their glow. I knew I couldn't leave the background all dark because then all the lights on the glass would appear to be coming from nothing, and that doesn't make any sense. But I didn't want to draw in all the lights and wires in detail. I have done that before on my Christmas inspired piece, but I felt that all those extra details would take away from the main subject this time. So I chose to leave only their glow in the background. This choice led directly to my next problem. I haven't really drawn with many yellow tones before, and I don't have a lot of experience with these colours. And I was having a lot of difficulty seeing the values correctly. I did try to use Photoshop to help me isolate the colours, but my reference photo was showing a really greenish cast, and I knew that was definitely not the effect I was after. I was also a little bit stuck trying to imagine how I was going to blend that dark background into the yellow light without making a muddy, uninviting mess. I went back to the old-fashioned method of trial and error. I pulled out my scrap of paper and I experimented with a lot of different pencils. I experimented with reds and oranges, but in the end I chose to use a dark umber prismacolor to tint my black background, which then allowed me to make a gradient from the black to the dark umber to a goldenrod and then to a white. This finally gave me a soft golden glow instead of a really garish yellow light. I must admit that at this point I still wasn't sure about the background, but with colour pencil the only way is forward, so I got to work on the bottle. Now this is my favourite part of the drawing. I started with the neck of the bottle, which was a little challenging as the foil on top of the bottle was quite torn in my reference picture, and I didn't want to include all of the mess. So I kind of had to wing it a little bit with many of the shapes in that foil, and I made it up a little bit as I went. I then got to drawing the actual glass, and this was where the fun really starts. Glass can seem like a really intimidating subject at first, but you'd be surprised how forgiving it can actually be. As long as you really closely follow those extreme lights and darks, everything in the middle can be altered a long way from your reference and you will still have a shiny looking object. I really enjoy looking for how the light is behaving while drawing glass. I love that the fairy light behind the bottle shines through and leaves those bright rays through the glass. And I love looking for all those tiny little pinpricks of light that sometimes turn up in unpredictable places. Seeing all of these little things as I draw that I wouldn't otherwise notice in my day-to-day life really is the greatest pleasure that I get from creating art. I feel like I am seeing a little treasure that has been left unnoticed, and it's almost always those little shines and sparkle of light that are left unseen. Geez, that's such an arty-farty thing to say. I'll stop right now before I geek out completely and embarrass myself. At about this point, I'm working on the label of the bottle, and once again I had to go back to my colour charts to try and define the colours that I was seeing. On the bottle, the colour of the label is actually quite a coolish white, but under this lighting it was a lot warmer and darker. And I was very surprised to find myself using a very dark warm grey to colour this area. When I had a base tone down that I was happy with, I used a ruler to draw in some of the markings on the label, because I knew even the slightest wobble on those lines would be very obvious and out of place. I then moved on to the glass which is lying down, and I had desperately underestimated just how tricky this would be. While the stand itself was pretty straightforward, the actual body of the glass was a real mindbender. I had struggled at the drawing stage trying to get my head around the way that the bottle behind was curved by the shape of the glass, but I felt I'd done a pretty good job. But once I came to the colouring stage, the perspective of that glass just kept throwing me off. This part took a long time as I had to constantly check and recheck my work, repeatedly stepping away and asking myself what wasn't working. With all of the constant reworking, I somewhat lost the perfect curve of the glass opening too, and I had to keep checking that I wasn't creating a wonky, misshapen glass that nobody would want to drink out of. While I quite like the end result, I do think I could have done a better job in this area. And if I was to do this again, I think I would approach this quite differently. Once this glass was complete, I moved on to the reflections. I think that I've used this black glass table as a prop enough to almost qualify as a series of pieces surrounding it. You know what? I didn't actually want to buy that table. My husband talked me into it, and while I hate cleaning fingerprints off it daily, I must admit that it was actually a pretty good call. Just don't tell him that. Finally, I used a very small amount of Brush and Pencil's titanium white touch-up texture mix to add some very tiny highlights. This step wasn't entirely necessary, but it did just add the finishing touch and brought just that tiny little bit more sparkle to the painting. So here's the final piece. I hope you've enjoyed this. Please leave a like or a comment to tell me what you think, and if you'd like to see more, please hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching, guys.